I'm really fascinated by imagination, and your talk about games sort of is really what brings out what imagination can do. And I think, thinking about it, it's the basic language for imagination is the symbol. And I've come to see there are two aspects to imagination. One is seeing, and the other one is feeling, which is very important. And I think my natural tendency is towards feeling. And I think we need to remember that it also needs to have a space, a room in this world, as well as the seeing and the aspect. So that's my pitch for this conference. I'm here because Deborah discovered this book that we had published at the archive called Archive for Research in Archetypal Symbolism. This December was published by Taschen. And I just want to say a little bit about the archive. It's a very unusual, far-out archive based on Carl Jung's ideas of archetypes and archetypal images. And it started actually almost 90 years ago in Switzerland by a woman who came there from Holland, and she found this beautiful piece of land, and she created a conference place called ARAS, which means a shared feast where you bring your own offerings, and this feels very much like that. You bring your poems, you bring the work you're doing to this shared feast. And she actually spent 7 years alone studying Eastern philosophy, and somewhere, she had a servant, and somewhere at the end of that time, she had kind of a breakdown, and she met Jung, and he became one of the major speakers at these annual conferences, and developed most of his theories and his books in some form at the conference. And it was also very important, so she wanted to merge East and West, and various disciplines. She had speakers from physics, art, philosophy, psychology, and so on. So it was sort of similar to what this is. And she also, at one time, started to add images to demonstrate the themes of the conference. And that became a collection that gradually came to New York, and that's the Archive for Research in Archetypal Symbolism, or ARAS for short. It's open to the public. You can come in and visit it, and it's also online now. You can become a member and access it. It has 17,000 images and text that goes with it. And you look it up under aras.org, ARAS.org. And it's being used by the people we know, the ones who come in, by a lot of artists come to be inspired, psychologists come in and look up dreams, or dreamers come and look up dreams, and designers use it, or people doing a logo, and so on. So people writing books, and of course this is happening much more online than in, but it's still open to the public if you're in New York on 39th Street. So about this book, this is the third book we have done, and it's an evocation of symbols. Jung said that if you want to write about symbols, you need to write a book about each symbol. So we had about 500 words to kind of describe the symbol. So we did it through image. Through image, you find this another way of speaking to the symbol. I want to show this image of a bird to evoke the world of imagination. So central to this conference. And it's at the beginning of all creative endeavors. In all times, birds have reflected our ability to imagine, to transcend, as it moves so easily between heaven and earth. Birds don't seem to be bound by the same nature, the same laws of nature that we are. With the lightness of thought, they defy gravity as they fly up into the air. This small water bird in flight is more than 30,000 years old. It was found in Germany not too long ago, and it's one of the oldest works of art ever found. And it's at that old, there were only cave paintings. So this is a little piece of sculpture. It's only 2 inches long, very powerful in its simplicity. And it makes us realize that 30,000 years ago, someone was able to move between the worlds, like the bird that can move between the elements, from the outer world of the senses to an inner vision. So something moved this carver to begin to shape a piece of ivory into a new form, to create something new. And with this something new, the world was changed forever, and it was no longer the same. And it is this dialogue between the carver and the bird, the storyteller and the story, the dreamer and his dream, and us humans and our gods, that keeps changing the world, that keeps creating the world. The forms may differ, but the language is the same, consisting of that inexplicable we call symbols. We have many names for this dialogue. Sometimes we call it art, other times we call it ritual or prayer, or new inventions, or games, or just an insight, a new understanding. But it is this meeting between the visible world and the invisible, conscious and unconscious, inner and outer, that the symbol, the image, functions as a bridge. So it can see into both worlds and sort of is the messenger to us, the guide to us. Jung spent his whole life thinking about images, and that's what I love about Jung. And this is what he says. It is as if we didn't know or constantly forget that all we know is through images. Psyche is image. What he does is to change our perspective a bit from our usual way of thinking that image is something we see, but it's something we take in through all the senses. It's hearing, touch, and sense, and so on. And Jung reminded us that we couldn't take in the outer world. I can't take this podium into my mind. All I can know about it is through image. And that remains then with me as a memory, as an experience, and together, that's all we can know about our world. That becomes our worldview, from the podium to the entire universe. Psyche is image. But images don't only come from without, they also come from within, as in the form of dreams and inspirations or sudden insights, which sometimes can change everything we previously believed or thought. And this is how Jungian analyst Marie-Louise from France describes it. She says, "It is as if something were known in the form of image, but not by us. It is as if something were known by the image, but not by us." Meister Eckhart, the German mystic and theologian, describes something similar when he says, and actually this is how we begin the book. Did I bring it up? No, I didn't. It's over there. He says, and if you want to look at it later, I have it here. He says, when the soul wishes to experience something, she throws an image of the experience out before her and enters into her own image. That is imageless seed being planted. And usually, when that happens, we feel some kind of fear. We know something is on its way, but we don't know what it is. We just have a sense that something is kind of coming to us. And it arrives as an inner trembling when an image calls us. The poet Rilke tells us not to be afraid when this happens. He says, "Fear not the strangeness you feel. The future must enter you long before it happens. But just wait for the birth of the hour of new clarity." I'm reading the poems twice because you almost need twice to hear them, so I read it again. "Fear not the strangeness you feel. The future must enter you long before it happens. Just wait for the hour of new clarity." The poet T.S. Eliot meant that every new poem changes all previous poems that have ever been written, as if they were a living organism. In the same way, everything changes when the new clarity, as Rilke calls it, arrives. It is like an earthquake within, a shift that plays with every new experience or insight, which is what Jung calls image. This is how the Swedish poet Thomas Tranströmer describes it. Actually, he just got the Nobel Prize in Literature a couple of days ago, so I'm very pleased to read his poem. It's called A Brief Pause in the Organ Concert. At home stood the all-knowing encyclopedia written. At home stood the all-knowing encyclopedia, a yard of bookshelf. In it I learned to read. But each one of us has his own encyclopedia written. It grows out of each soul. It is written from birth onwards. The hundreds of thousands of pages stand pressed against each other, and yet with air between them, like the quivering leaves in a forest. The book of contradictions. What's there changes by the hour. The pictures retouch themselves. The words flicker. A wave washes through the whole text. It's followed by the next wave and the next. So what he does is the encyclopedia is the factual knowledge that we have, but he also combines it with the inner knowledge, the wisdom of knowing. Another poet, William Carlos Williams, describes how important the inner images are, and without them, life may easily lose its meaning. And this is how he says it. "It is difficult to get news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there." I read it again. "It's difficult to get news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there." So what Williams does is to juxtapose the images flooding us all the time from mass media and social media with a precise or distilled image of the poem. And I think what we need, we are really flooded by images, and we also need that deeper connection to what the meaning is, to something more than just the image. And so when we make that connection, it's almost as if time stands still. We are in the real moment, the present time. So he juxtaposes our needs for the latest news with our hunger for the timeless and eternal. The historian of religion, Mircea Eliade, says it this way: life is not possible without an opening to the transcendental. Humans cannot live in chaos. Without the connection to our inner images, which, like poetry, brings order to connections, the news become chaotic and the world feels fragmentary. So, as you notice, I'm also using poems to describe what I mean by symbols. It is as if our ordinary language isn't enough. T.S. Eliot expresses it this way: a poem wants another poem, an image wants another image. And the poem is really an image in words. In Swedish, my native language, if you hear my accent, the word for poetry is dikt, and in German dicht, which in English are the words for tight or thick. So as if poetry condenses the most essential to one single tight image. Or as the Spanish poet Jiménez says it, poetry seems to me as a form of expression of that which cannot be said, which could also describe the symbol. A symbol is the best way of describing something that is not known. And according to William Carlos Williams, poetry is something we need when the world is too much with us. Another poet who shared the same feeling was the Norwegian poet Olav Hauge, and he wrote a poem about what we need to do when there is too much in our lives. And at the same time, he describes the very essence of poetry. He called it, "Don't come to me with the entire truth," which I will read. Don't come to me with the entire truth. Don't bring the ocean if I feel thirsty. Not heaven if I ask for light, but bring a hint, some dew, a particle, as birds carry only drops away from water, and the wind a grain of salt. I read it again. Don't come to me with the entire truth. Don't bring the ocean if I feel thirsty. Not heaven if I ask for light, but bring a hint, some dew, a particle, as birds carry only drops away from water, and the wind a grain of salt. Here the poet distills every image to a reservoir of eternity, the essence which is what moves us. It was Emerson that who pointed out that every word was once a metaphor, a word which means carry as a cross. It means carry a cross, and from one reality to another. As birds carry only drops of water, and the wind a grain of salt. And with that, the entire ocean has been called up through the scent of salt in the air. And we are no longer drowning at the beginning of the poem. The Chilean poet Pablo Neruda also evokes the image of the ocean through an image of salt in this poem, but he uses the sense of taste. These are the last line of a poem he called Ode to Salt. Taste recognizes the ocean in each salted morsel and the inward flavor of the infinity. I read it again. Taste recognizes the ocean in each salted morsel and the inward flavor of the infinity. In an instant, we have moved from a grain of salt to eternity, from the outer world to an inner experience. The poet has changed our perspective, and it is as if time stands still. And there is this sense of recognition. Everything feels right when that happens. It is interesting how often poetry uses images from nature as if to remind us that the outer and our inner nature are one. And when that happens, we feel at home. Most of us live in a sense of exile from nature, but the poem and the image can bring us back to a feeling of belonging. We feel whole. This is an image of an ancient star map from 1247. All cultures have imagined that they saw archetypal images or other mythic figures in the stars. Most of the time, we never notice the sky when we sort of live our busy lives. But one night, we may look up into the sky and see the stars. And when that happens, we are flooded with emotions, and that is when the image turns into an archetypal image, or symbol, as Jung also called it. The Greeks called it epiphania, or in English, epiphany, which meant that the divine world had appeared. Here is a poem about such an epiphany. It's called The Music of the Spheres, and it's written by the French poet Jean Follin. He was walking a frozen road. In his pocket, iron keys were jingling, and with his pointed shoe, absent-mindedly, he kicked the cylinder of an old can, which for a few seconds rolled its cold emptiness, wobbled for a while, and stopped under a sky studded with stars. I read it again. He was walking a frozen road. In his pocket, iron keys were jingling, and with his pointed shoe, absent-mindedly, he kicked the cylinder of an old can, which for a few seconds rolled its cold emptiness, wobbled for a while, and stopped under a sky studded with stars. And suddenly, the poem brings at the end a vision of the starry sky, and we have become part of the beauty and order of the cosmos, a word which means order. We feel that we belong and that we are whole. And that's why I like this image of the sky as a circle. In ancient China, the word for universe was heaven and earth. And one of the most fundamental principles of Taoism is that heaven and earth needs to be in harmony. Both the visible world of nature and the invisible nature of heaven, and also our inner nature. This ancient bronze mirror from China allows our own face in the front to be reflected by the universe on the back that we see here, the circle of the sky and the square earth within it. Jung reminds us that we can only grasp the world as a psychic image in ourselves, and it's not always easy to decide when the image changes, whether the world or ourselves have changed, or both. Every discovery puts a new face on the world. I want to read a final poem also by Thomas Tranströmer, who describes this numinous union of inner and outer in a poem he calls Vermeer, by evoking the symbol of a wall, which usually divides, separates, rather than unites, which it does here. The poem is called Vermeer, and I want to show an image of a painting by Vermeer. It's a young woman with a water pitcher. Vermeer, the walls are part of you. One either knows that or one doesn't. But it is the same for everyone except for small children. There aren't any walls for them. The airy sky has taken its place, leaning against the wall. It is like a prayer to what is empty, and what is empty turns its face to us and whispers, I am not empty, I am open. You know how the light always comes in through some window in his paintings. So I read it again. The walls are part of you. One either knows that or one doesn't, but it is the same for everyone except for small children. There aren't any walls for them. The airy sky has taken its place, leaning against the wall. It is like a prayer to what is empty. And what is empty turns its face to us and whispers, I am not empty, I am open. And what is empty turns its face to us and whispers, I am not empty, I am open. This circle by a Zen master is another way of describing the paradox of being both empty and being the source of all life. Yesterday we learned that or heard that we come from the stars, and I like to think about that metaphorically, thinking about where I come from, where I came from, and where I go after life, and we will never know that. That is a true mystery. And we may want to ask, where do symbols come from? And we won't know that either. This is the first of a whole series of images from a 13th century Chinese alchemy text describing the same thing. This is the Tao, which was there at the beginning, conceived as an empty void of infinite potential. Here shown with the alchemist in what the text describes as audience with the primordial. We respond to images of circles because we recognize something in them. We are drawn to them because we recognize something of ourselves. As if looking into a mirror, the circle is a reflection of the world's and our own unity. This is an image of the seed sound from India, where creation takes place through sound. It's an image of Om, the first word, logos in the Western world, spreading throughout the universe as a continuous creation. And the same thing in ancient Greek, where creation took place through the symbols of geometry. And we heard a wonderful demonstration of that yesterday with the geometry and music and mathematics. And so they really studied nature and saw how nature gives form. And through geometry, they created form. So here's the first form that by using a compass, the main tool in geometry, and where you put the center point of the compass is the seed. And the circle, the inner circle and the outer circle is the same. The center and periphery is the same. And this seed was also how one could describe a symbol, the potential of becoming. And this idea of geometry also carried over into Christianity, where you can see God creating the universe with his compass. And I end with the final image in the alchemy manuscript, which is the same image as the initial one of the empty circle, where the multiplicity of the world is drawn into, it becomes one again. And I thought I would end with this tiny cell in this form of a circle, which is about to divide the unity into two. And each next new cell will divide itself endlessly as long life lasts. Oops. With a little water. So, I have a couple of minutes. Yes. I just want to give you the definition of symbol because I think it describes this portion of the conference. Symbol means, it comes from two Greek words, meaning the first one is sim, that we know from sympathy and symphony, and the last comes from a verb ballen, which means throwing. So things in a symbol are thrown together from the opposites. And out of this, in the middle, something new emerges, a third emerges, which Jung called the transcendent function. Something new comes out of the opposite. And I think that's what this conference and coming together of so many different things, and something else happens. And with that, thank you very much.